A single decision made in a dark alley on the coldest night of the year. One man who wanted nothing but a quiet life. One woman who had everything, except the truth. Three armed men. A terrified stranger. And a former Navy SEAL who couldn't walk away. What happened next didn't just save one life. It cracked open a conspiracy that threatened to destroy an entire community, expose a billion-dollar corporation from the inside, and force two very different people to confront who they really are when everything is on the line. If you've ever believed that ordinary people can change things that seem impossible to change, stay with me until the very end. Hit like and drop the name of the city where you're watching. I want to see how far this story travels. The cold that settled over the Harbor District that night wasn't the kind you complained about at the office. It was the kind that crept through the seams of your jacket, found the back of your neck, and reminded you that warmth was something you had to earn. The streets near the waterfront were mostly empty. A few delivery trucks idling outside the seafood warehouse on Pier 9. A single taxi with a cracked taillight sitting at the red light on Canton Avenue, its driver asleep with his chin on his chest. Damon Mercer walked the same route he'd walked for 3 years. Down Merchant Street, left on Alcott, across the narrow footbridge over the drainage canal, then the long service alley that ran behind the Harbor Grand Hotel. A shortcut that saved him 8 minutes and let him avoid the traffic signal at 5th, that never seemed to work right in winter. He was tired in the specific way that maintenance work made a man tired, not the clean exhaustion of a hard run or a good workout. It was the accumulated weight of 10 hours dealing with other people's broken things. A burst pipe in Unit 4C that had turned Mrs. Okafor's kitchen floor into a shallow wading pool. A heating unit in the East Wing that had decided to stop functioning on the coldest day of the month so far. 3 separate calls from residents about a smell in the elevator that turned out to be a dead mouse wedged behind the motor housing. He smelled like pipe solvent and something else he didn't want to identify. His phone said it was 31 degrees. He believed it. The alley behind the Harbor Grand was wide enough for a delivery truck, lit by 2 overhead lights mounted on the hotel's service entrance, except one of the bulbs had burned out weeks ago, which left the far end of the alley in deep shadow. Damon had actually noted it on his mental list of things the city should deal with. The way he noted things like that out of habit. You spent enough years in environments where darkness could kill you, you started cataloging it automatically. He heard her before he saw her. Not screaming. That was the thing. It wasn't the kind of distress call that made bystanders stop. It was a low, controlled sound. The voice of someone who understood that screaming would make things worse. A woman saying, quietly, but with a firmness that was clearly costing her something, "I already told you, I don't have it." Damon slowed, stopped. 3 figures near the far end of the alley. 2 of them had positioned themselves to block the exit. Not obviously, but deliberately, the way men do when they've done this before. The third stood closer to the woman, his back partially to Damon. He was tall, heavy-set, wearing a dark overcoat that looked expensive, not the uniform of a street mugger. The woman was backed against the hotel's brick wall. She was dressed for a business dinner. Heels, dark blazer, a phone gripped in one hand. Her posture was controlled, the way someone stands when they're refusing to let their body betray how scared they are. But her hand was shaking. Damon stood very still for 3 seconds. He wasn't a young man anymore. He was 42, with a trick knee that gave him trouble on cold mornings, and a scar that ran from his left shoulder blade to his ribs from an incident in a country he still couldn't talk about. He had a 16-year-old daughter at home who would be angry if he was late because she was pretending she didn't wait up for him, even though she always did. He had every reason to call 911 and keep walking. He took out his phone. He did call 911. He told them the location clearly, calmly, then put the phone back in his pocket without ending the call. Then he walked toward them. Chen. He didn't announce himself the way they did in movies. He didn't shout. He walked at a measured pace that was neither threatening nor hesitant, and he stopped about 15 feet from the group, close enough to be undeniable, but far enough to give himself room. "Hey," he said. Just that. Flat. The way you said it when you weren't asking permission. The man closest to him turned. He had the kind of face that had been in a few fights. A nose that sat slightly off-center, small eyes that were busy doing a rapid assessment. He was probably mid-30s. The other two turned as well. The third man, the heavy-set one near the woman, did not. He kept his back to Damon and spoke without turning around. "Walk away," he said. His voice was unhurried, which was somehow worse than if it had been loud. "This is a private conversation." "She doesn't look like she's enjoying it," Damon said. Now the man turned. He had the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. Well-fed, 50-something, the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His eyes went to Damon and did the same calculation the first man's had, but faster and colder. "I said walk away." Damon looked past him to the woman. "You okay?" She looked at him. She was about 30, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, and despite the fear there was something calculating in her expression, like she was already 3 moves ahead even now. "No," she said. "I'm not." The man in the expensive coat made a small gesture with his left hand, the kind of gesture that was a signal. Damon registered it. The 2 men at the alley exit began moving toward him. Here's the thing about a Navy SEAL. What the movies got wrong wasn't the fighting, it was the thinking. You didn't become good at combat by being fast or mean or fearless. You became good at it by understanding environments so thoroughly that you stopped seeing a location and started seeing a system, every element that could be controlled, disrupted, or used. The alley was no different from any other operational space. Damon had been reading it since he walked in. The overhead light, the service entrance door, propped open, he'd noticed, probably by a hotel employee on a smoke break. The fire alarm pull station mounted on the wall just inside that door. The hotel's outdoor security camera. He'd counted 2, and their coverage angles. The metal dumpster positioned between him and the 2 approaching men. He had 8 to 12 seconds before the 2 men reached him. He used them. He stepped quickly to the service entrance, caught the door before it could swing shut, reached inside, and yanked the fire alarm pull station down in one motion. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The alarm didn't just ring, it screamed, a piercing wall of sound that bounced off the alley's brick walls and became something almost physical. The hotel's service entrance flooded with light as the emergency lighting activated. 2 seconds later, both of the alley's overhead lights came back on. Apparently they were on the same emergency circuit, because the burned-out bulb blazed to sudden life along with everything else. The entire alley was lit like a stadium, and from inside the hotel, noise, doors, voices, the mechanical sound of what was probably a commercial kitchen shutting down. The man with the off-center nose stopped moving. So did the other one. They looked at each other, then at the blazing alley, then at the hotel entrance where a door had just burst open and 3 kitchen workers in white uniforms were piling out, confused and loud. The heavy-set man in the expensive coat looked at Damon. Damon looked back at him and said nothing. There was a moment, maybe 3 seconds, where it could have gone a different way. Damon knew what that looked like. He'd seen it before, in places where the stakes were much higher. The moment where a man decides whether the risk is worth it. The man in the expensive coat looked at the kitchen workers, looked at the camera, looked at the phone in the woman's hand. He straightened his coat. He said, in a voice that was controlled and quiet and somehow more threatening than shouting would have been, "We'll finish this conversation another time." He walked out of the alley. The 2 others followed him, not running. They were careful about that. They walked like men who had somewhere else to be and had simply decided to go there early. Damon watched them until they were gone. The kitchen workers milled around the alley entrance, complaining about the cold in 2 different languages. Someone from inside the hotel was calling out about a false alarm. He turned to the woman. But she hadn't moved from the wall. That impressed him, actually. Most people would have bolted toward the kitchen workers, or toward him the moment the other men started walking away. She'd stayed where she was, watching everything, still holding the phone. "They're gone," Damon said. She exhaled. It was the first time she'd let herself do that. "I know." She pushed off from the wall, tested her weight on the heels. One of them had a slight wobble that hadn't been there before. She looked down at it briefly, then up at him. "Thank you." "You hurt?" "No." A pause. Rattled. She said the word like it cost her something to admit it. "Police are on their way. I called before I came over. She looked at him sharply. How long ago? 3, 4 minutes. Something moved across her face, not quite alarm, but close to it. I can't be here when they arrive, she said. He looked at her for a moment. That's an interesting thing to say. I know how it sounds. She met his eyes directly. I'm not the one who is doing anything wrong in that alley, but if I give a statement tonight, certain people will know that I'm here and that I have this. She held up the phone briefly. Before I'm ready for them to know, and that will be a problem. Damon considered this. He was tired, his knee hurt, the alarm was still screaming. You have somewhere safe to go? Yes, I just need to get there. She was already moving, already thinking past this moment. Then she stopped, turned back. The phone. She looked at the device in her hand, then at him, and made a quick, almost reluctant decision. She held it out. Can you hold on to this? I have reason to believe someone has my accounts monitored. If I carry it, it becomes a liability. And I can't. She started to explain and then stopped herself. Please. Damon took the phone. He didn't know why. He probably should have said no. You're going to want to explain this to me at some point, he said. I know. She was already walking toward the far end of the alley, away from the approaching sound of sirens. I'll find you. You don't know who I am, he said. She glanced back once. No, she agreed, but I know where the Harbor Grand is, and I know who pulled that fire alarm. A hint of something in her expression that might, under different circumstances, have been a smile. I'll find you. She rounded the corner and was gone. 2 police officers arrived 45 seconds later. Damon gave a statement. 3 men, he said. Couldn't identify them clearly in the dark. No weapons visible. He'd pulled the alarm to disperse them. The woman had been frightened but uninjured, and she'd left before he could get her name. All of that was accurate. He did not mention the phone. Bad. He was home by 12:40. The apartment was dark except for the lamp in the living room that his daughter Keisha always left on, the one by the couch, where she always pretended to fall asleep doing homework and never fooled him for a second. She was on the couch now, textbook on her chest, headphones half on. She cracked one eye open as he came in. You're late, she said. I know. Pipe burst again? Sort of. He set his tool bag down, took his jacket off, felt the phone in his jacket pocket and left it there. Keisha watched him with the particular alertness teenagers had when they could tell something was off about a parent but hadn't decided yet whether to press it. She was 16 and she'd gotten her mother's eyes, quick and careful, along with his stubbornness, which was the combination that kept him honest because she could read him like a maintenance log. You okay, Dad? Yeah, he said. Just cold. She didn't entirely believe him, he could tell, but she let it go. Warm something up for you? She asked. I got it. Go to bed. She gathered the textbook with the particular exaggerated slowness of someone demonstrating that they're going to bed entirely on their own schedule and not because they were told to. I have a calc test Thursday, she said, as if this was related to the previous conversation. I know. You told me Monday. I'm just saying, I might need you to quiz me. Tomorrow night. She disappeared down the hall. He stood in the kitchen and heated leftover rice and some cold chicken he found in the back of the refrigerator and ate standing at the counter because he was too tired to sit down, which was its own kind of exhaustion. He thought about the woman, the way she'd kept her voice level when she was scared, the way her hands had shaken, but her voice hadn't. The very specific things she'd said about certain people knowing she had the phone before she was ready for them to know. He pulled the phone out. The screen was cracked, not catastrophically, but badly enough that a corner of it was a spider web of broken glass. He could see there was a notification on it. He didn't unlock it. It wasn't his. He set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it while he finished eating. She'll find you, he'd said to himself as he walked home. He hadn't entirely believed it when he said it. In the morning, Damon was up at 5:45 out of habit. He made coffee, checked his maintenance log for the day, a window seal in 7B, the lobby buzzer that was intermittently cutting out, A reported water stain on the ceiling of Unit 12A that was probably related to the bathroom directly above it in 13A. He wrote the order of operations in his notebook. Smallest job first to build momentum, the way he'd organized things for 20 years. He was in the parking lot by 8, about to start on the window seal, when he heard it. Engines. Multiple, coming down Alcott Street. He straightened up. 3 vehicles. Not the battered sedans and mid-range SUVs that populated Harbor View's parking lot. These were black. New. The kind of clean that came from professional detailing twice a week. 2 of them were identical. The third was a full-size luxury sedan that probably cost more than 2 years of Damon's salary. They pulled in with a precision that seemed excessive for a residential parking lot. People stopped. Mrs. Okafor, who was leaving for her early shift at the school where she worked as a cook, paused with her car keys in her hand. The 2 young guys from Unit 3D, who were usually outside smoking at this hour, went quiet. Even old Mr. Valentino, who was hard of hearing and rarely noticed anything that didn't involve his parking space being taken, looked up from his newspaper. The rear door of the sedan opened. She was dressed differently than she'd been the night before. Dark suit, efficient and expensive. Her hair was up. She looked, in the flat light of a November morning, like someone who ran things. The specific kind of someone who walked into rooms and changed the temperature without raising her voice. She spotted Damon across the parking lot immediately. Behind her, a man in his 40s who had the bearing of a senior executive was saying something in a low voice. She said something back without looking at him, and he stopped talking. She walked across the parking lot toward Damon. He stood there with a tube of window sealant in his hand and waited. "You said you'd find me," he said when she was close enough. "I did." She stopped a couple feet away. In the daylight, she looked like she'd slept about as well as he had, which was to say, not very well. But she was put together in the careful way of people who'd learned to function on limited rest without advertising it. "I wanted to return this in person." She held out a new phone, still in the box. "And I wanted to explain." "You're the one who owns this building," Damon said. She didn't look away. "My company does. Ashford Property Group." "Victoria Ashford." "Yes." He looked at the phone in her hand, then at the one still in his jacket pocket, then back at her. Around them, he could feel the weight of the parking lot's attention. Everyone watching, everyone quiet. These were people who'd gotten eviction notices, people who'd been told repeatedly that their maintenance requests couldn't be addressed due to funding constraints, that rent increases were necessary, that the property was under review. They were looking at the woman responsible for all of that. And Damon was looking at the woman from the alley and trying to figure out which version of her was the real one. "You want to tell me," he said slowly, "what was on that phone? Because I didn't look at it. But I've been thinking about what you said, about people finding out before you were ready. And I've been thinking about who those men were last night, and I'm starting to think they weren't muggers." Victoria Ashford looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "No, they weren't." A long pause. "Can we go somewhere and talk?" she asked. "Somewhere private." Damon looked at the tube of window sealant in his hand, at the maintenance log in his back pocket, at Mrs. Okafor, who was still standing by her car and watching with the particular expression of a woman who had learned a long time ago to pay attention when something unusual happened near her home. "There's a break room inside," he said. "It's nothing special." "That's fine," she said. He turned toward the building. After a moment, she fell into step beside him. The parking lot exhaled around them. Seats. The break room was exactly what he'd said it was. A folding table, 4 chairs that didn't match, a coffee maker that had seen better days, and a window that looked out on the east wall of the building next door. He poured 2 cups without asking. She took hers and wrapped both hands around it like she was cold, which maybe she was. He sat down across from her. She put the cracked phone on the table between them. "The men last night work for a man named Gerald Sutton," she said. "He's my executive vice president of property development. He's worked for the company for 11 years. I trusted him completely." She said this last sentence the way you said something you were still trying to understand, the words working out the shape of a new and unwelcome reality. 3 weeks ago, I discovered a series of financial discrepancies in the Harbor View accounts. I started asking questions. I asked them quietly because I didn't yet know who I could trust. She looked at the phone. 4 days ago, someone sent me an anonymous file. I opened it in a hotel room in Seattle, on that phone, because I was traveling and didn't want it connected to my company devices. What I saw, she stopped. What was in it? Damon said. She looked at him. Enough to destroy people, she said. Including possibly me. The coffee maker clicked and settled in the corner. They must have tracked the phone, she said. Sutton's people. They knew I was at the Harbor Grand last night. They wanted the device before I could get the contents to anyone. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then, what did I save last night? You or evidence? The question sat on the table between them like a third cup of coffee. Victoria Ashford met his eyes. Both, she said. And I think this building, your building, these families, they're the reason that evidence exists in the first place. Outside the window, Damon could hear the parking lot slowly returning to life. Car doors, an engine turning over. The sound of ordinary morning business resuming in a building full of people who didn't know yet that something had just changed. He looked at the cracked phone. Start from the beginning, he said. Victoria talked for 47 minutes. Damon let her. He'd learned a long time ago that the most important thing you could do when someone was trying to explain something complicated was to stay quiet and let the shape of it emerge on its own. Interrupting too early just made people defensive, and defensive people stopped telling you the truth. She told him about the anonymous file, about the financial discrepancies she'd first noticed 3 weeks ago in the Harbor View operating accounts, expenses that were logged but didn't correspond to any vendor on record, maintenance fees paid to a company she'd never heard of called Meridian Structural Services, LLC. She'd asked her finance team about it. They'd told her it was a recently contracted firm handling specialized assessments. She'd accepted that. She wasn't proud of it now. She told him about the trip to Seattle, the hotel room, the moment she opened the file on the cracked phone and spent 2 hours reading things that made her feel like the floor had stopped being solid. She told him about Gerald Sutton. Damon listened to all of it. He drank 2 cups of coffee. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "How many units in this building?" She blinked. It wasn't what she'd expected him to ask. 114. Average family size? I'd have to check. 3, he said. Give or take. Some are singles, some are couples. The Nguyen's in 9C have 5 kids. Average it out, you're talking about 320, 340 people. He looked at his coffee. I've been the maintenance supervisor here for 3 years. In that time, I've submitted 261 maintenance requests. About 60 of them were marked urgent. You know how many of those urgent ones got addressed within the required response window? She was quiet. 31, he said. I know because I kept the records myself, on my own time, because the company's system kept losing them. He said it without heat, just flat, factual. I didn't do it because I was planning anything. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because these are people's homes. He looked up at her. So when you tell me that someone inside your company has been falsifying engineering reports and deliberately running this property into the ground so they can clear it for redevelopment, I believe you, because I've been watching it happen for 3 years and I couldn't figure out why. Victoria set down her coffee cup. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't, Damon said, and then because he was not a man who left things unfinished. But that's the beginning of the problem, not the end of it. She didn't argue with that. He appreciated it. He picked up the cracked phone from the table. You said the file is on here. Encrypted. I have the key. I didn't want to access it until I was somewhere I trusted. She looked around the break room, the mismatched chairs, the secondhand coffee maker. A small, crooked smile crossed her face that seemed genuine precisely because it was involuntary. Somewhere unexpected. Can your people at the company access this? They shouldn't be able to. The phone was never registered to any account. I bought it in cash at a drugstore in SeaTac Airport. She paused. But Sutton's people tracked me to the hotel anyway, which means either I was physically followed or... She stopped. Or someone in your inner circle told them you were traveling, Damon said. She looked like she'd been hit, not dramatically, just the subtle collapse of something behind the eyes that happened when a thought you'd been avoiding finally caught up with you. Yes, she said quietly. The break room door opened without a knock. Damon looked up. Keisha stood in the doorway, school bag on one shoulder, staring with undisguised curiosity at the expensive sedan visible through the break room window and then at the woman sitting across from her father. She was in her school uniform, a burgundy sweater she'd been trying to replace for a year, dark jeans, sneakers she'd saved up for herself because Damon had said they were too expensive, and she'd responded by getting a Saturday job at the dry cleaners on Renwick. "Those your cars?" she said to Victoria. "Keisha," Damon said. "I'm just asking." "Yes," Victoria said. "They are." Keisha looked at her father, looked back at Victoria, made a teenage assessment that was faster and probably more accurate than most adults managed. "Okay," she said, and then to Damon, "I'm going to be late. Quiz me tonight?" "Tonight," he confirmed. She left. The door swung shut behind her with the particular energy of a 16-year-old who understood she'd walked into something significant and was demonstrating, by leaving without another word, that she was mature enough not to push it. Damon watched the door for a moment. Victoria was watching it too. "She's yours?" "Yeah." "She looks like someone who doesn't miss much." "She doesn't," Damon said, and the combination of exasperation and pride in the two words was involuntary and obvious. He cleared his throat. "We need to look at what's on that phone." They looked at it together for 2.5 hours. What was on it was worse than Damon had expected, and he'd already adjusted his expectations considerably downward after Victoria's explanation. The anonymous file was a collection of internal documents, engineering assessments, financial records, intercompany communications, and the incorporation paperwork for a series of shell companies whose names meant nothing until you traced the registered agents, which the file had helpfully already done. Meridian Structural Services, LLC, was one of 4 companies. The others were Coastal Property Analytics, Harborside Assessment Group, and something called Blue Tier Development Partners. All 4 had been incorporated within an 18-month window. All 4 had received payments from Ashford Property Group's Harborview operating account, authorized under maintenance and safety assessment budget lines. All 4, when you followed the registered agent paperwork through 2 layers of Delaware holding companies, led back to the same management trust. "Do you know a name?" Damon said, "connected to this trust?" Victoria's finger traced the document. She stopped. The name meant something to her. You could see it arrive on her face. "Raymond Chu," she said. He was Sutton's college roommate. He's never had any official role with the company." "He didn't need one," Damon said. The engineering reports were what made Damon's jaw tighten, not because he was surprised by what they said, but because he'd been living alongside the reality they falsified for 3 years. Reports certified by a licensed structural engineering firm. Damon looked it up. The firm existed, had a professional website and everything. That concluded Harborview's building systems were in acceptable condition, and that observed deterioration was within normal parameters for a building of its age. Reports that cleared the property for continued occupancy while quietly noting, in technical language buried in appendices, that long-term structural investment was inadvisable given projected property value trajectories. Reports that were, in Damon's professional assessment, fabricated, or at minimum so selectively observed as to be functionally identical to fabrication. "The boiler in the east wing," he said. Victoria looked up. "I put in 3 urgent requests last year to have it inspected by a licensed engineer. The company kept sending their own people who kept telling me it was fine. 2 months ago it failed on a night when the temperature was 18 degrees. He kept his voice level. "We had 40 families without heat for 31 hours. There's a woman on the 4th floor, Mrs. Tremaine. She's 73 years old and has respiratory problems. Her granddaughter had to drive 2 hours in that weather to get her out." He looked at the engineering report on the screen, at the section that had signed off on the boiler system as adequate 18 months before it failed. "That's not just fraud, that's recklessness." Victoria didn't look away. She nodded once, slowly, and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. Outside the break room window, Harborview went about its morning. A woman was loading grocery bags into a Honda Civic. Two kids were kicking a ball against the wall of the east wing, the hollow sound of it carrying through the cold air. Damon closed out of the engineering reports and looked at the communications. The email chain was between Sutton and three other executives whose names he didn't yet know. It was careful language. The kind of language people used when they knew they were writing something that shouldn't exist but needed to document it anyway for their own protection. References to the project's projected timeline, to regulatory navigation, to community response management, which appeared to be a phrase meaning what to do about the residents. There were references to inspection scheduling and to ensuring appropriate results, which was the kind of phrasing that sounded bureaucratic until you understood what the appropriate results were meant to confirm. There was a reference to the remaining hurdles, one of which was described as the on-site personnel situation, and Damon recognized, without particular emotion, that this was probably about him. He set the phone down on the table. "What do you want to do with this?" he said. Victoria had been watching him read. She looked like someone in the process of assembling a picture she hadn't wanted to see in full. "Take it to the board," she said. Then, less certainly, "Except I don't know which board members Sutton has relationships with. He's been with the company longer than most of them." "What about outside the company?" "Law enforcement is the right answer, eventually." She said it with the particular frustration of someone who knew what the right answer was but could also see all the ways it complicated things. "But if we go to law enforcement right now, with only this, Sutton's lawyers will tie it up long enough for them to complete the evidence cleanup they've clearly already started." "How do you know they've started?" "Because 3 weeks ago, when I first noticed the financial discrepancies, I asked a member of my finance team to pull the original vendor contracts for Harbor View maintenance expenditures. She picked up her cup, found it empty, set it back down. 2 days later, she told me the files had been archived due to a system migration, and retrieval would take 4 to 6 weeks. She looked at Damon steadily. "We don't do archive migrations in November. Not ever. It's end-of-year reporting period." Damon nodded slowly. He was starting to see the full shape of it. "So they're already moving." "They know I have the phone. They didn't get it back last night. That means they're either going to accelerate, push the project forward before I can do anything, clear the property quickly and present the redevelopment as a fait accompli, or they're going to try a different approach to getting rid of the evidence." She paused. "Or both. How much time do we have?" "If they accelerate the project," she thought about it, "the next scheduled building inspection is in 6 weeks. If they can get a sympathetic inspector to flag this building as structurally unsound, they can begin emergency relocation procedures, which under city code don't require the same resident notification period as a standard eviction." "Emergency relocation," Damon said it quietly. "That's the play. Get an inspector to condemn the building. Clear it out. Once the residents are scattered, the legal process to keep them out is a lot easier than evicting them from their homes." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone had turned on a radio. He could hear it faintly through the window, tinny and indistinct. Then he said, "I have maintenance records going back 3 years. My own records, not the company's. Actual dates, actual conditions, photographs I took myself of repairs I made and work orders I filed. It's all in a folder in my apartment." Victoria looked at him. "I kept them in case I ever needed to defend myself if something went wrong and the company tried to put it on me," he said. "Standard practice. I've been doing this long enough to know you document everything." He paused. "Turns out the documentation might be useful for a different reason." Yes, that could be significant. It's not enough on its own, but it establishes a paper trail that contradicts the engineering reports. A real engineer, an independent one with no connection to any of Sutton's shell companies, could look at the discrepancies between what I documented and what those reports certified and have a lot of questions. Do you know anyone like that?" "No," Damon said. "Do you?" She thought for a moment. "I went to grad school with a woman named Paula Reyes. She runs an independent structural assessment firm in this city. I haven't spoken to her in years. She has no business relationship with Ashford Property Group. I know that for certain because I've seen the approved vendor list." A pause. "She's also not the kind of person who would agree to look at something sensitive as a favor. She'd need to be approached honestly." "Then approach her honestly." If I approach her, Sutton's people may notice. Then I approach her, Damon said. Victoria looked at him. Why would you do this? You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Damon picked up the empty coffee cups and stood up. He took them to the small sink in the corner, rinsed them, set them upside down on the edge. A maintenance man's habit. You cleaned up after yourself because nobody else was going to. Then he turned around and looked at her. Mrs. Okafor has worked the morning shift at Lincoln Elementary for 14 years, he said. She saved enough to put her daughter through the first 2 years of community college. She told me 6 months ago she wasn't sure if she could afford to move if the building was sold because the rents in this neighborhood have changed, and what she pays here, she couldn't find that anywhere else. He stopped. Her daughter's name is Amara. She wants to be a nurse. A pause. The Nguyen's have been here 12 years. Their oldest son was born in that unit. He's 12 now, and he plays chess, and I beat him sometimes when I'm fixing something in their apartment, and he can't resist showing off. Another pause. Mr. Valentino is 78. He moved to Harbor View the same year his wife died because the apartment was manageable and the neighbors were decent. He has emphysema. If you disrupt his life at this point, at his age, that's not a practical problem. That's something else. He looked at her without apology. So yeah, it's my fight. These are my people. Victoria Ashford sat at the folding table in the break room of a building she owned and looked at the man who'd spent 3 years fighting quietly for the people who lived in it, and she said nothing for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. Okay, Damon said. Who else do you trust inside your company? Not who you think you trust. Who you know. She thought about it seriously. This was not a woman who gave careless answers. My assistant, Marcus. He's been with me personally for 4 years. He doesn't report to Sutton's division and has no reason to protect him. She hesitated. And possibly my general counsel, Ellen Marsh. She's meticulous and she doesn't like Sutton, but I'm not certain. Can you get to Marcus without going through your normal office channels? I can call him on a personal line. Do that. Tell him you need him to compile the complete original vendor approval records for Harbor View, not the archived ones. Anything that was approved through your office directly, anything that had your signature. Don't tell him why yet. Why? Because if what you're thinking is true, about someone in your inner circle tipping Sutton off, the fewer people who know the full picture right now, the better. We give people tasks, not context. They can't expose what they don't know. She looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read, something between reassessment and the very specific discomfort of being organized by someone she'd walked in intending to help. You've done this before. Not this, he said, but something like it. The moving parts are different. The principle isn't. She picked up her own phone, the new one, not the cracked one, and started to dial. Then she stopped. I need to tell you something else, something I didn't include in what I told you earlier. He waited. In the file, there's documentation of approvals, budget authorizations, safety system modifications, sign-offs. Some of them have my signature. She said it without covering it with anything. Just put it on the table between them, the same way she'd put the cracked phone there an hour ago. I don't remember authorizing some of them. I believe they were either forged or submitted under authorization frameworks that I signed without understanding the specific application. But I don't know yet which ones I actually signed and which ones I didn't. The room was very quiet. That's the thing that kept me up last night, she said. Not the men in the alley. That. Damon looked at her for a moment. Does it change what you're going to do? She blinked. I mean, he said, does it change whether you're going to expose this? Something settled in her face. Decided. No. Then we deal with that when we get there, he said. Make your call. She nodded and dialed. While she talked to Marcus in a low, careful voice, Damon stepped outside the break room and stood in the hallway for a moment. He could hear the building around him, footsteps above, a television somewhere, the particular sound of Harbor View doing what it always did, ordinary life inside a place that somebody had decided was more valuable empty than full. He took out his own phone. He had a number for an independent investigator, a woman named Serena Vance who'd done some work 3 years ago on a workers' comp case that had tangentially involved the building. She was sharp, discreet, and she didn't like being lied to. which was the quality he most wanted right now. He didn't know if she'd take this on. He also didn't know exactly what he was asking her to take on yet, which was its own problem. He called her anyway. She picked up on the third ring. He heard road noise in the background. "Mercer," she said. "It's been a while." "Yeah," he said. "I've got something. It's complicated, and it might get messy." A brief pause. "How messy?" "Corporate fraud, falsified safety records, possible evidence destruction in progress, and at least 3 men willing to corner a woman in an alley to get a phone back." Silence. Then, "Who's the woman?" "Victoria Ashford." Another silence, longer this time. "The Ashford Property Group, Victoria Ashford." "Yeah. And she's talking to you because it's a long story. It always is with you." He heard the turn signal click in the background. "I'm going to need to hear all of it. How soon can you get to Harbor View?" "Hour and a half," she said. "Maybe 2. Traffic on the connector is stupid today. Break room on the ground floor. Come to the side entrance on Alcott. Don't park in the main lot." "You think someone's watching the building?" "I don't know yet," Damon said. "I'd rather operate like they are." He hung up and stood in the hallway for another moment, listening to Harbor View breathe around him. The old pipes, the elevator that needed maintenance he'd been trying to schedule for 6 months, the wind against the windows of the East Wing. 300 and some people going about their Tuesday morning without knowing yet that the ground underneath everything they'd built here was shifting. He went back into the break room. Victoria was off the phone. She looked up at him when he came in, and there was something different in her face now than there had been an hour ago. Not relief exactly, more like the specific quality of someone who had stopped calculating whether to act and started calculating how. "Marcus is pulling the records," she said. "He'll have them by this afternoon." "Good." Damon sat back down. "I called someone who can help. She'll be here in a couple hours." "Who?" "Independent investigator. She's thorough, and she's got no connection to your company." Victoria nodded. Then she looked at the cracked phone on the table. "Those men last night, Sutton sent them, but someone had to tell him I was at the Harbor Grand, and the only people who knew my travel schedule were my assistant, my driver, and—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "And my executive assistant, Claire." She said the name carefully. "She's been with the company for 6 years. She transferred into my office from Sutton's division 3 years ago." Damon said nothing. He let her work through it. "She's the one who told me the file archive migration was standard procedure," Victoria said quietly. The coffee maker clicked again in the corner. Outside the window, the woman with the Honda Civic had finished loading her groceries and was backing carefully out of her space, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the edge of the open window, even though it was cold. Ordinary Tuesday. Ordinary life. Oh, and underneath it, something that had been rotting for longer than anyone had admitted. "We start tonight," Damon said. "My records, your file, your contact at the engineering firm, and Serena. We build a complete picture before they have time to bury what's left." He looked at her steadily. "Once we start moving on this, we don't stop. We stop. We lose the momentum. We lose momentum. They have time to regroup, and we lose the window." "I understand." "One more thing," he said. She waited. "The residents here, they're going to need to know what's happening. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Because if Sutton moves to accelerate the inspection, or if there's any kind of legal action in the next few weeks, the people in this building need to be prepared, not blindsided." He held her gaze. "That's non-negotiable for me." She met his eyes, didn't flinch. "Agreed." He stood up. She stood up. They were both tired, and neither of them was going to say so. "I've got a window seal to fix in 7B, he said. "Then I'll get my records together." He picked up the cracked phone and held it out to her. "Keep this somewhere safe, not in your bag, not anywhere they'd expect." She took it. Her hand was steady this time. "Where then?" He thought for a second. "You got anything with you that nobody would open? A personal bag, a jacket pocket, something unremarkable?" She looked down at herself. Professional suit, minimal accessories. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and produced a small, hard case, the kind people use for reading glasses. She opened it, took out the glasses, tucked the phone in, snapped it shut. Simple. Invisible. He nodded. She walked toward the break room door, then paused with her hand on the frame and looked back at him. In the gray morning light through the small window, she looked less like the CEO of anything and more like someone standing at the edge of something large and irreversible, trying to find their footing. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm sorry. For all of it. The maintenance request, the boiler, Mrs. Tremaine," he said. "Mrs. Tremaine. All of it." She said it without dressing it up. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," he said, "it doesn't." A pause. "But it's a place to start." She left. He heard her heels on the hallway floor, and then the side door, and then the sound of a car door and an engine, and then Harbor View settling back into the ordinary sounds of itself. Damon stood in the break room alone for a moment. He thought about Keisha, who would be in first period by now, probably already thinking about the calc test. He thought about the maintenance log in his back pocket, and the window seal in 7B, and the 261 maintenance requests he'd filed that had been ignored by people who'd already decided this building had a different future than the people in it knew. He picked up his tool bag. He went to fix the window. Serena Vance arrived at Harbor View at 11:40, 40 minutes later than she'd estimated, which she blamed on the connector and a fender bender near the 5th Street interchange. She was 51, compact, with close-cropped gray hair, and the manner of someone who had spent enough years in rooms where people lied to her that she'd developed a kind of permanent low-level skepticism as a resting state. She wore a canvas jacket that had seen 3 winters and carried a messenger bag that was visibly heavy. She shook Damon's hand in the break room doorway, looked at Victoria once, and said, "You look smaller in person." Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your company headshot. You look taller in it." She sat down without being invited and pulled a legal pad from her bag. "Okay, start from the beginning, all of it." So they did. By the time they'd finished, it was past 1 in the afternoon. Serena had filled 4 pages of her legal pad with notes written in a cramped hand that probably only she could read. She hadn't interrupted much. When she did, her questions were specific and technical. Dates, document reference numbers, the exact language used in the shell company registrations. The kind of questions that told you she was building something, not just listening. When they finished, she looked at her notes for a long moment, tapping the end of her pen against the pad in a slow, irregular rhythm. "The engineering firm," she said finally. "The one that certified the false reports. Coastal Engineering Associates?" "Yes," Victoria said. "I know that name." Serena said it without particular expression. "They came up in a municipal parking structure case 2 years ago. The certification on a post-tension inspection was questioned. The city let it go, but the original complaint is public record." She looked up. "That's a pattern. 1 incident is an anomaly. 2 incidents is something worth showing a judge." "Can you access the original complaint?" Damon asked. "Already in my head. I'll pull the documentation tonight." She flipped back a page on her legal pad. "The shell companies. You trace them to this Raymond Chu through the registered agent paperwork. You're confident in that chain?" "The file is thorough," Victoria said. "Whoever sent it knew what they were doing." "Which brings us to the whistleblower." Serena looked at her. "You have no idea who sent it?" "None. Anonymous file sent to a phone you bought with cash, to an email address, a temporary address I created the day before I got on the plane to Seattle. I've never used it before." Serena nodded slowly. "So whoever sent it knew you were going to Seattle, knew you well enough to reach you through a channel that didn't exist until 24 hours before they used it, and had access to documents that would have required significant internal access to compile." She paused. "That's not someone on the outside looking in. That's someone inside Sutton's operation who decided to burn it down." The break room was quiet. "Or someone who'd been documenting it themselves for a long time," Damon said, and finally found a moment when the timing made sense. "Either way," Serena said, "they're the key. Because the file gives us a roadmap, but a whistleblower who can testify from personal knowledge, that's what actually moves a case." She closed the legal pad. "You need to find them." "How?" Victoria said. "The file itself. There'll be something in how it was assembled. The selection of documents, what was included, what wasn't. Every collection of evidence reflects the collector. What did they choose to put in, and what did they leave out tells you something about where they sat inside the organization and what they had access to." She looked at Damon. "Your maintenance records. Can I see them?" He'd brought them down from his apartment that morning. A manila folder that had been sitting in his filing cabinet for 3 years, fat and slightly bent at the corners. He pushed it across the table. She opened it, started going through it, and within 2 minutes she was holding pages side by side and making small sounds that weren't quite words. "This gap," she said, pointing to a period in the maintenance log from 14 months ago. 3 weeks with almost no approved work orders, and then a cluster of emergency repairs. "The inspectors came through that period," Damon said. "Every time there was a scheduled inspection, approved maintenance work mysteriously dried up for the 2 to 3 weeks before it. Then afterward, a rush of emergency authorizations." Serena looked at him over the pages. They didn't want active work orders on record during the inspection window. A building with ongoing maintenance in progress raises questions about what's being fixed and why. "That's what I figured," Damon said. "I started documenting it specifically after the 3rd time it happened." She set the papers down. "You're going to be important in a courtroom someday soon. You know that." "I'd rather not be," he said honestly. "Nobody ever would." She started repacking her bag. "I need 2 days. I want to trace the shell company chain independently, pull the parking structure case, and look at the file with fresh eyes. Can you get me a copy of the full contents of that phone?" Victoria and Damon looked at each other. "Getting a copy out means the data moves," Victoria said. "If someone is monitoring, air-gapped laptop," Serena said. "Never connected to any network. I've got one. We transfer the data physically." She looked between them. "I'm not new at this." They made the transfer that afternoon. Serena left with the data on a USB drive that she tucked into an interior pocket of the canvas jacket. She didn't say goodbye so much as she left, pausing at the door only to tell Damon she'd call him on the number he'd given her, and nowhere else. The break room felt emptier after she was gone, which Damon recognized as a function of how much presence she occupied when she was in it. Paula Reyes, Victoria's contact from graduate school, agreed to meet the following evening. Getting her to agree had taken 2 phone calls. The first one, Victoria had opened honestly, as she'd said she would, and Paula had needed 24 hours to think about it before calling back to say yes. She was a careful person. That was exactly what they needed. The meeting happened in the basement storage level of Harbor View, which Damon had suggested because it was the part of the building with the most direct evidence of what the engineering reports had cleared as adequate. Paula Reyes was 53, with reading glasses perched on her head and the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind was always running slightly ahead of the conversation. She spent 40 minutes going through Damon's records and the relevant sections of the copied file, asking questions in a technical vocabulary that Damon could follow and that Victoria was clearly working to keep up with. When she finished, she took her glasses off her head and turned them in her hands. "The boiler assessment," she said. "The one that signed off on it as adequate. I know the engineer who submitted this report. Not well, but I know the name." She looked at the document. "This notation in the appendix, this is not standard language. This is specific language that, if you were reading it without context, sounds like a routine observation. But within the profession, this phrasing is used to indicate a conditional certification. It means the engineer had reservations but certified anyway." "Why would an engineer certify something they had reservations about?" Victoria asked. Paula looked at her steadily. "Why do you think?" A silence. "What I can tell you," Paula said, "is that I can produce an independent assessment of this building's actual structural condition, starting with the systems that were certified in these reports. If my findings contradict the certifications, and based on your maintenance records, I expect they will, significantly, then that's a direct evidentiary challenge to the engineering reports." She put her glasses back on her head. "It'll take me about 10 days. "We may not have 10 days, Damon said. "I understand that, but a rushed assessment is a compromised assessment. If I'm going to be useful to you, I need to be thorough." She looked at him with the patient firmness of someone explaining something obvious without being condescending about it. 7 days. I'll push." 7 days. Damon did the math in his head. 6 weeks until the scheduled inspection, minus whatever head start Sutton's people might already have in accelerating it. 7 days was not comfortable, but it was workable if nothing else moved in the wrong direction. Nothing else moved in the right direction for the next 4 days. Then 3 things moved at once, and none of them were in the right direction. The first was that Marcus, Victoria's assistant, called her on the personal line to tell her that the Harbor View vendor files she'd asked him to pull had been marked as transferred to off-site storage by an authorization he didn't recognize. The authorization was dated 4 days ago, 1 day after Victoria had called him. Someone had been watching what he was doing, or had anticipated it. The files were gone. The second was that Damon came out of his apartment at 7 in the morning to find that the door of his building's maintenance office had been forced. Whoever had done it was long gone. The filing cabinet was intact. He'd moved the originals of his personal records to his apartment the day after Victoria's first visit, a decision he'd made without fully articulating why, just a low instinct that said keep what matters close. But the company maintenance files had been gone through. Several folders were disordered in a way that suggested someone looking for something specific. He called Serena before he called anyone else. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "That tells us something. That they know we're building a case. That they're looking for your personal records specifically. They know about you, which means whoever told Sutton about Victoria's travel also told him about you." A pause. Or Sutton made you himself. You were in that alley. He saw your face. Damon stood in the doorway of the maintenance office and looked at the disordered files. He was aware of a specific kind of cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Not fear exactly. Something older and less nameable. The feeling of being inside something that was moving faster than the speed at which you could make careful decisions. "What's the third thing?" Serena said. "I haven't told you the third thing yet." "There's always a third thing." He told her. A resident on the 6th floor, a young man named Tyler who worked odd hours and noticed things, had mentioned to Damon that morning that there'd been an unfamiliar car parked on Alcott Street for the last 2 nights. A dark sedan. Different plates both nights, but the same car, Tyler was pretty sure. Same dent above the rear left wheel well. Serena was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Change of plan. I'm moving up my timeline. Can you get Victoria to a place tonight that isn't her home, her office, or anywhere connected to her normal routine?" "Probably." "There's a data center," she said. "Closed facility, used to belong to a subsidiary of a telecom company that went under 6 years ago. The property was acquired by a holding company and has sat vacant since. I did a surveillance case on that building once, and I still have the access logs from when I was working it." She said it in a way that left the details of how she still had the logs deliberately vague. "Based on what I've found in the past 2 days tracing Sutton's shell companies, I think the data center is where they're staging the evidence cleanup. It's the right kind of space. Off the books, secure, nobody looking at it." "You think the evidence is there?" "I think what's left of it is there. And I think if we don't get to it in the next 48 hours, it won't be there anymore." Damon was quiet for a moment. "We're talking about entering a private facility." "The property title is a mess," Serena said. "I'm not certain it's legally private in any clear sense. The holding company that owns it has 3 outstanding code violations and no active occupancy permit." Another deliberate vagueness. "I'm not telling you to break the law, Mercer. I'm telling you that I'm going to that building tonight and that I thought you might want to come." "What about Victoria?" "I thought about that. She needs to see what's in there herself. If there's what I think there is, she needs to be a witness, not a recipient of a second-hand account, for what comes after." A pause. "But it's her call." Damon called Victoria. He told her the situation plainly, without softening it. She listened without interrupting. He'd noticed she did that, the same way he did. Didn't interrupt when it mattered. When he finished, she said, "I'll be there. You understand what this is?" "I understand," she said. "I'm not asking anyone to protect me from it." The data center was on the eastern edge of the Harbor District, where the warehouses and light industrial buildings thinned out into the kind of blocks that were neither residential nor commercial, just the leftover geography of a city that had repurposed some of its old industrial land and not yet gotten around to the rest. The building was 5 stories, brick and glass, the glass dark, some of the windows on the upper floors boarded, a parking structure connected to it on the south side, equally dark. They went in at 10:40 that night. Serena had a key card, old, reprogrammed, that got them through the service entrance. Inside, the building still had emergency power running to certain systems, which meant there was a low baseline of light, and the HVAC made a sound like slow breathing that was somehow worse than silence. Damon went first. Old habit. Serena beside him, Victoria behind. Nobody spoke. Serena had a flashlight. Damon had his phone light. Victoria had neither, but stayed close enough to use theirs. The first 2 floors were empty. Office furniture still in some of the rooms, abandoned mid-use, chairs pushed back from desks as if people had stood up and just not come back. The kind of institutional emptiness that happens fast and leaves everything exactly where it was. The 3rd floor was different. Recent activity. Not subtle about it either. The dust on the floor was disturbed in broad swaths, tracks from multiple people moving equipment, extension cords running from the emergency power outlets to a bank of portable workstations along one wall. File boxes, maybe 30 of them, stacked in a specific order. And against the far wall, a server rack, relatively new, humming with its own quiet purpose. Serena moved to the file boxes first. She opened the top one on the nearest stack, looked inside, and went very still. "Come look at this," she said. Damon and Victoria crossed the room. Victoria looked into the box. Physical documents, printed emails, contract documents, engineering reports. Not the sanitized versions from the file on the phone, but originals. Handwritten notes and margins. Cover sheets with routing information. The paper trail that existed before anyone thought to clean it up. "They pulled the digital files," Serena said quietly, "but someone printed copies before they did. Or didn't realize these physical originals still existed. Whichever it was, they moved them here instead of destroying them, either because they weren't sure they'd need them, or because destroying physical documents takes more time and more people than deleting files. Or because someone wanted them preserved," Damon said. Both women looked at him. "The whistleblower," he said, "the person who sent Victoria the anonymous file. If they were inside this operation, they would have known about this location. They might have been the one who compiled these boxes in the first place." He looked around the room at the systematic organization of the file boxes, the specific order of them. "This isn't staged for destruction. This is staged for retrieval." Serena was already photographing the box contents with her phone. "We take what we can carry, photographs of everything else." "No." Victoria's voice was different than it had been a moment before. She was looking at the documents in the box, and her face had the quality of someone reading something they already knew they would find but had hoped they wouldn't. She reached in and pulled out a single document, a budget authorization form. She held it in both hands. Her signature was at the bottom. Not a forgery. She could tell. The pressure of the pen, the specific way she looped the A in Ashford. Her actual signature. Damon watched her read it. She turned to the next page. Another authorization. Her signature. Another. She went through 6 documents without speaking, her face doing the work of someone doing arithmetic on a problem they don't want to solve. Then she set them back in the box and stood very still. "How many of them?" Damon said. "At least 6 that I can see." She said it steadily, but the steadiness was a thing she was maintaining through effort. "There may be more." She set her hands flat on the top of the file box and looked at them for a moment. "These aren't forgeries. I signed these. I don't remember the specific documents. I sign hundreds of budget authorizations in a month. But these are real." Serena stopped photographing. The room was very quiet except for the HVAC. "What do they cover?" Damon asked. "Safety system modification approvals." Victoria's voice was flat. 3 of them cover the authorization to defer maintenance on the fire suppression system in the East Wing pending assessment. 1 covers... She stopped, picked it up again. "1 covers the deactivation of the emergency pressure relief system on the boiler." She put the document back down. Damon thought about the boiler failure, the 31 hours. Mrs. Tremaine at 73, being driven out at 2 in the morning in 18-degree weather by her granddaughter. He didn't say anything. "I signed these as routine budget items," Victoria said. "They would have been in a stack of authorizations. Sutton's team controlled the preparation of the authorization packages that came to my desk. They would have worded these to appear routine. Deferral pending assessment is standard language in property management. It doesn't flag as dangerous without context." She turned to look at Damon directly. "But I signed them." I know, he said. And if this goes public, when this goes public, my signature on these documents will be part of the record. I can explain the context, but I can't make my signature disappear. She picked up the boiler authorization again and looked at it, and replaced the file entries with amended versions. It would take about 6 hours. She looked at him. Her voice was completely neutral. I could have Sutton and everyone else on the record and get my name out of it. I know, Damon said again. I'm not going to do that. I know that too. She set the document back in the box. I just needed to say it out loud, that the option existed. A pause. And that I'm not taking it. Serena looked between them for a moment. Then she went back to photographing documents without comment, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Damon looked at Victoria for a moment. She was 30 years old, running a corporation she'd built on principles she'd believed in, and she was standing in an abandoned data center at 11 at night, holding evidence that was going to cost her something real. And she was not asking him to tell her it would be okay because she already understood that okay was not the point. The authorization packages that came to your desk, he said. Sutton's team controlled them. Yes. Can you document that? The workflow, but who prepared, who reviewed, who routed to you? She thought. Marcus would have the routing records. The internal workflow system logs every step of the authorization process, from preparation to signature. Is that log modifiable? No, it's third-party compliance software. The audit trail is right once. She understood where he was going. I can show that the authorizations were prepared and routed by Sutton's team without my knowledge of their full context. That doesn't erase your signature, Damon said, but it establishes how it got there. That's what a truthful record looks like. You didn't know, but you signed. Both things are true. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face shifted. Not relief, not absolution, but something adjacent to the recognition that honesty, even expensive honesty, had a specific shape that was different from other things. Both things are true, she agreed quietly. Serena had moved to the server rack. She looked at it, turned to Damon. Do you know what you're looking at with something like this? Somewhat, he said. What do you need? I need to know if there's anything on this system that isn't in the physical files, and I need to know if there's an active connection, whether someone can remotely wipe it. He looked at the rack, followed the cables, found the network interface and traced it to the wall port. The port had an indicator light. It was dark. No active network connection, he said. It's air-gapped, nothing coming in or going out, which means everything on it is static. Whatever's there, it's there. She pulled a drive from her bag, looked at the server, found the USB interface, looked at Damon. How good are you at this part? Good enough, he said. He worked for 23 minutes while Victoria photographed the remaining file boxes, and Serena organized the documents they were taking. His hands were steady, which was the thing he most appreciated about his years of training, that under pressure his hands remembered how to be steady even when nothing else was. The drive was 3/4 full when he heard something, below them, the service entrance level. He raised one hand. Serena and Victoria both stopped immediately. Footsteps. More than one person. Moving carefully but not carefully enough. The specific not carefully enough of people who thought they were walking into an empty building. Damon pulled the drive, powered down the interface in the correct sequence, and looked at Serena. She was already moving toward the far side of the room, to a secondary stairwell he'd noted when they came in. He'd noted it the same way he'd noted the service entrance and the emergency lighting and the fire exits, out of the habit of reading spaces for options. They went up, not down. 4th floor. Moved to the east side of the building, away from the sounds below. Found a room with a window that faced the parking structure. The glass was intact but old, and Serena pushed it up with a sound like a held breath. Below them, the parking structure's roof deck was 8 feet down. They went out the window. Victoria didn't hesitate. She went second, after Serena, and the heels she was wearing were not made for this, and she landed wrong on one ankle, catching herself on the roof deck surface with both hands. Damon came last, pulled the window back to near closed behind him, and they moved across the parking structure roof without lights, to the far side, down the structure's external stairwell, and out onto the side street 2 blocks from where they'd left the cars. They walked, fast but not running. Running drew attention. Victoria was limping slightly. Not badly. She didn't mention it. When they reached Serena's car, 4 blocks away, they got in and stayed still for a moment. The street was empty. A light rain had started at some point while they were inside. Serena looked at the drive in her hand. Whatever's on this, it's real, and it's complete. Well, and whoever was just in that building, Damon said, they're going to find the boxes disturbed. They'll know someone was there. Yes, Serena started the car. Which means the clock we've been watching just got shorter. In the back seat, Victoria sat with both hands in her lap, and the ankle she'd landed on pulled up slightly, and she said, "How short?" Serena looked at her in the rear-view mirror. "Days," she said, "not weeks." Victoria nodded. She looked out the rain-streaked window at the dark harbor district sliding past. "Then we use the days," she said. Damon looked at her from the passenger seat. Her blazer was torn at the left shoulder from the window exit. Her hair had come partly loose. One of her hands, he could see in the reflected light from the street, had a raw scrape across the palm from catching herself on the roof deck. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the water, visible now between the buildings as Serena turned toward the harbor road, the surface of it dark and restless under the rain. He turned back forward. The drive in the center console. 300 and some people asleep in the building they were heading back toward. Keisha, home alone, who would be pretending to be asleep but wasn't. The clock that had just gotten shorter. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and he understood that the tiredness didn't matter, which was something he'd known for a long time and had hoped not to need again. The rain came harder against the windshield. Serena turned the wipers up. Nobody spoke the rest of the way back. The rain was still falling when Damon got back to Harbor View at midnight. He stood under the overhang at the side entrance for a moment, listening to it hit the pavement before going inside. Keisha was on the couch, not pretending to sleep this time. She was sitting up with her knees pulled to her chest, the lamp on, the television off, and she looked at him when he came in with the specific expression she'd inherited from a woman he'd loved and lost and didn't talk about. The look that said she'd been worried and wasn't going to pretend she hadn't been. "You're soaked," she said. "Little bit." He took his jacket off, hung it over the chair by the door. She watched him. "Dad?" "Yeah." "What's happening?" He looked at her for a moment. She was 16. She was also, in the ways that mattered, more perceptive than most adults he knew. He'd been trying to protect her from the details of this, and she'd been letting him, which meant she understood the details were worth protecting her from and had been waiting for him to tell her when the right time was. He sat down on the couch next to her. "It's complicated," he said, "but it's moving, and it's going to come to a head pretty soon." "The building?" "Yeah." "And that woman, Ashford?" "Yeah." Keisha was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is she for real? Or is she doing that thing where rich people act like they care until it costs them something?" He thought about Victoria in the data center, her hands on the file box, the authorization with her real signature, her voice saying, "I'm not going to do that," with the specific flatness of a decision that had already been fully made and didn't need decoration. "I think she's for real," he said. "I could be wrong. I've been wrong before." "Not often," Keisha said, which was generous, but also, he suspected, accurate enough. "Go to sleep," he said. "You've got school." She unfolded herself from the couch, stopped at the hallway. "Quiz me in the morning, before you go down?" "Set your alarm for 6. She made a face that communicated everything she thought about 6 in the morning, and went to bed. He sat there for another 20 minutes, not doing anything, just letting the silence settle. Then he took the maintenance log out of his back pocket and opened it to a fresh page and wrote down everything he needed to have ready for the next 48 hours. It was a long list. He did not find this comforting, but he found it clarifying, which was close enough. The next morning, Serena called at 7:15. She'd been up all night. "The drive," she said. "There's a directory on the server that I almost missed. It's nested inside what looks like routine system files, but it's not. It's a compiled archive. Whoever put it there labeled it with a maintenance file name from 2 years ago. If you weren't looking specifically, you'd skip right past it." The whistleblower, Damon said. Has to be. It's everything. Not just the Harbor View operation. The same playbook applied to 4 other properties Ashford owns across the state. Same shell companies, different property names, different inspectors, same structural manipulation. All documented. Timelines, authorization chains, financial flows. She paused. And a full record of every communication between Sutton and Raymond Chu going back 31 months. How detailed? Detailed enough that a federal prosecutor would weep from happiness. Another pause. There's something else. One of the communication threads, it references a scheduled emergency building inspection. Harbor View. It was filed 3 days ago with the city. We have 9 days. Damon was already moving to his desk. Not 6 weeks. They accelerated it the night after we were at the data center, which either means they found evidence we were there or they'd already set this in motion and the timing is coincidence. She didn't sound like she believed in coincidence. 9 days, Mercer. The board meeting has to happen before the inspection. He called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring. He could hear from the quality of the silence behind her that she was already in a car, already moving. I know about the inspection, she said before he could tell her. Marcus found the filing this morning. Someone submitted it under an emergency safety concern flag. She paused. The submitted concern cites inadequate structural maintenance. It references 3 specific systems, all 3 of which were cleared by Coastal Engineering Associates in their last certification. The same certifications Paula is going to refute. Paula finished early, Victoria said. She called me an hour ago. She has her full independent assessment. It took her 5 days instead of 7. A beat. She found violations in every system Coastal Engineering cleared. The boiler pressure system, the fire suppression in the east wing, the load-bearing inspection on the south stairwell. All of it. Her voice was controlled but tight. The south stairwell, Damon, that's 200 people using it every day. He let that sit for a second. We need to call an emergency board meeting. I'm already working on it. I have the authority to call one with 48 hours notice under the company charter. I'm invoking it this morning. She took a breath. I need you to be there. Not in any official capacity, but you need to be in that room. Why? Because the board members I can't fully trust will be looking for any reason to question the source of what we're presenting. You are the source of a significant portion of it. Your records, your photographs, 3 years of your personal documentation. If you're not there to present it yourself, it becomes secondhand testimony that Sutton's allies can challenge. A pause. And because you've earned the right to be in that room. He looked around his apartment, the maintenance log on the desk, Keisha's calc textbook still on the coffee table from last night, the jacket still drying over the chair by the door. I'll be there, he said. The 48 hours between that call and the board meeting were the kind of hours that didn't pass the way normal time passed. They moved in 2 registers at once, the practical, task-oriented register of preparation, and underneath it, a low continuous frequency of tension that didn't let you forget what was coming. Damon spent the first day compiling his presentation materials with Serena. They organized 3 years of maintenance records into a chronological evidence package. Serena cross-referenced every disputed engineering certification with the corresponding dates in Damon's logs, producing a side-by-side comparison that made the discrepancies visible even without technical training. Paula Reyes provided a written executive summary of her independent assessment, 4 pages of clear technical language that translated into plain English without losing precision. Marcus pulled the workflow routing logs for every authorization package that had come through Victoria's office in the past 3 years. The Right Once compliance system records that showed exactly who had prepared each document and under what authorization level before it reached Victoria's desk. Gerald Sutton, they knew, was aware something was happening. Victoria had been careful with the board meeting notice. The agenda listed it as a quarterly governance review, which was unusual in timing but not without precedent. What she couldn't hide was the timing itself, the sudden invocation of emergency charter authority. By the end of the first day, Marcus reported that Sutton had requested copies of the agenda twice through different administrative channels. On the evening before the board meeting, Victoria called Damon from what he guessed was a hotel room. The ambient quality of the silence was different from her car, more contained. Sutton requested a pre-meeting conversation with me this afternoon, she said. I declined. Smart. He sent a message through my general counsel, Ellen Marsh, the one I mentioned. He said he wants to discuss operational matters before the board is involved. A pause. Ellen recommended I take the meeting. Damon was quiet. She's either genuinely concerned that I'm making a procedural mistake by bypassing him, Victoria said, or she's his. I still don't know. What did you tell her? That I appreciated the advice and was proceeding with the meeting as scheduled. Another pause. Longer. I've also been thinking about something. Claire, my executive assistant, the one I think tipped Sutton off about Seattle. A beat. She came to my office today to confirm the meeting logistics. She looked terrible. Not guilty terrible. Scared terrible. There's a difference, Damon said. I know. I've been thinking about what you said at the data center, about the whistleblower being someone inside who wanted the evidence preserved, someone who'd been documenting it for a long time. She stopped. What if it was Claire? What if she was placed in my office by Sutton, but somewhere in 3 years she changed her mind about what she was doing? What if she sent me the file and then panicked because she realized Sutton knew she was in my orbit and he'd assume it was her? Damon considered this. Did you ask her? Not directly. I don't know how to ask that directly without either tipping her off if I'm wrong or frightening her into silence if I'm right. Don't ask her yet, he said. After tomorrow. If she's the one who built that archive, she'll still be there after, and she'll need someone to tell first. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You're good at this, she said. Not flattery, just observation, the way you noted something factual. I've had practice reading situations, he said. Different situations, same skill. Does it ever stop costing something? She asked. Not abstractly. She meant something specific. He thought about it honestly. No, he said, but you get better at knowing what you're paying for. A long silence, then, get some sleep, Damon. You too, he said. Neither of them did. The Ashford Property Group board meeting was held in a conference room on the 22nd floor of the company's downtown tower. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, the harbor visible on the eastern exposure, a long table of dark wood with seating for 14. Damon arrived with Serena at 8:50, 20 minutes before the scheduled start. He was wearing the suit he kept for court appearances and Keisha's school events, charcoal gray, slightly too formal for what he normally did, which was fine. Serena had dressed for a deposition, which is to say she looked like someone who had been in rooms like this before and was not impressed by any of the furniture. Victoria was already there, standing near the window with Marcus at her side and Ellen Marsh slightly behind her. She saw Damon come in and something in her posture shifted. Not relief, not exactly, but the adjustment of someone who'd been carrying weight and had just found firmer ground under their feet. The board members filed in over the next 15 minutes. 9 of them. Damon watched each one, the way Serena watched each one, reading body language, noting who looked at Sutton when they came in and who looked at Victoria. You could learn a lot from the order of those glances. Sutton arrived last. He came in with 2 men Damon didn't know. Not the men from the alley, different men, the kind whose suits announced they were lawyers before they said a word. He was composed, unhurried, and he looked around the room with the particular confidence of a man who had been in control of something long enough to have difficulty imagining otherwise. His eyes found Damon. A pause. Fractional. He looked at Damon with the same cold calculation he'd aimed at him in the alley behind the Harbor Grand 2 weeks ago, and for one moment the two contexts collapsed together. The dark alley and the 22nd floor boardroom, and the 300 people sleeping in a building between them. Then Sutton sat down. Victoria opened the meeting. She was precise and without preamble. She said there were matters of significant concern regarding the management of Ashford Property Group's residential portfolio that required the board's immediate attention, that she was invoking her authority under Section 7 of the company charter, and that she was asking everyone to withhold questions until the full presentation had been made. One of the board members, an older man named Hartwell, who Damon had been told was a Sutton ally, started to object. Victoria looked at him with a quality of patience that was somehow more forceful than interrupting him would have been, and he stopped. Damon presented first. He stood at the end of the table and he talked about the building the way he knew it. From the inside, from the maintenance crawl spaces and the boiler room and the stairwells that 300 people used every day without knowing what was behind the walls. He talked about the maintenance requests. He walked through the timeline, the 261 requests, the 60 urgent ones, the 31 that were addressed within the required window. He put his personal records on the table, the originals, the ones with dates and photographs and his own handwriting in the margins. He put Paula Reyes's independent assessment beside them. He showed the board, point by point, system by system, the gap between what Coastal Engineering Associates had certified and what an independent licensed engineer had found when she actually looked. He talked about the boiler. He described the failure. The 31 hours. He said Mrs. Tremaine's name, and he said Amara Okafor's name, and he said the names of the Nguyen's 12-year-old son, who was named Daniel, because these were not abstract residents, and they deserved to be named in the room where decisions about their homes were being made. The board was very quiet. Sutton's composure held, but it had a quality now of something maintained by effort rather than by ease. Serena presented the financial investigation. Shell companies, registration chains, Raymond Chu, payment flows. She was methodical, and she didn't editorialize. She let the documents carry the argument, and the documents were very good at it. Then Victoria stood up. She took the board through the authorization packages, the workflow routing records from the compliance system, who prepared each document, who reviewed it, who sent it to her desk, under what classification. She showed the pattern, the language used to present safety deferral authorizations as routine budget items, the compression of multiple approvals into single packages, the specific timing relative to inspection windows. Then she showed her signatures. She didn't try to make them look different than they were. I signed these documents, she said. I want to be clear about that. I signed them without understanding what I was authorizing, because they were presented to me in a way designed to obscure what they actually permitted. That is a failure of due diligence on my part, and I'm not standing here to ask for a pass on it. She looked around the table. What I am standing here to tell you is that this was not a failure of judgment in isolation. It was the intended result of a deliberate, orchestrated effort to use my authority without my informed consent, and to profit from that misuse at the expense of over 300 people who trusted this company to maintain the homes they were paying for. Hartwell said, Victoria, these are very serious. They are, she agreed. That's why we're here. She looked at Gerald Sutton. Gerald, she said. She said his name the way you said the name of something that used to mean something different. I need you to step out of this meeting. Sutton looked at her. His lawyers looked at each other. That's not... You are the subject of this proceeding. That's not a formality. She held his gaze. Please step out. One of his lawyers leaned to him and said something low. Sutton listened. He looked at the room, at the board members, at Damon, at the documents covering the table, and whatever calculation he ran in those few seconds came up with a result he didn't like, because he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out without another word. The lawyers followed. The door closed. The room exhaled. The next 2 hours were not clean. Hartwell pushed back. 2 other board members asked questions that were technically procedural, but functionally protective of positions they'd held because of Sutton's influence. One of them asked, at one point, whether the maintenance supervisor's personal records could be considered sufficiently objective given his obvious interest in the outcome. And Damon looked at the man and said, calmly, that the question he should be asking was why the company's own records contradicted an independent engineer's assessment of systems that had been certified as adequate, and that if there was a satisfactory explanation for that discrepancy that didn't involve fraud, he would very much like to hear it. There was not a satisfactory explanation that didn't involve fraud. By the time the board recessed at noon, 3 things had been formally moved. Sutton's immediate suspension pending investigation, the suspension of all Harbor View redevelopment planning, and the engagement of an independent investigative firm to review the complete residential portfolio operations. All 3 passed. Hartwell voted against the third. He was the only one. Victoria did not look triumphant when the votes were recorded. She looked like someone who had done a necessary and costly thing and understood that the cost was real and not going to decrease just because the thing had been necessary. After the formal session ended, the board members and their assistants gathered their materials and filed out in the particular subdued rush of people processing something that had just redefined their professional landscape. Hartwell left without speaking to anyone. Damon stood at the window and looked at the harbor. Ellen Marsh approached him. She was small, deliberate, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and an expression he couldn't entirely read. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Miss Marsh." "I recommended she take the meeting with Sutton yesterday," she said. "I want you to know that was genuine counsel, not protection of him. I was worried she was moving too fast without enough cover." "I know," Damon said. She looked at him. "Do you?" "Victoria told me your history with Sutton, and I watched you in the meeting." He paused. "You weren't running protection. You were nervous about the procedure. Different thing." She studied him for a moment. "You're more observant than maintenance supervisors are generally assumed to be." "Most things are more complicated than they're assumed to be," he said. She almost smiled, didn't quite, walked away. Victoria found him still at the window a few minutes later. Most of the room had cleared. Marcus was packing up files at the far end of the table. Serena was on the phone in the corner, already moving to the next thing. Victoria stood beside him and looked at the harbor. "That was the easy part," she said. "I know." He meant it. The board meeting was a decisive moment, but decisive moments were not the same as finished moments. The investigation would take months. The legal process longer. Sutton had resources, and he would use them. The emergency inspection would still happen, and while Paula's independent assessment gave them strong grounds to challenge any condemnation finding, challenges took time, and Harborview's residents would be living inside that uncertainty. "The residents," he said, "they need to know today. Not a sanitized version. What happened, what the board decided, what comes next. They deserve the full account." "I know," Victoria said. "I'll be there." "They're going to be angry," he said. "Not a warning exactly, just accurate." "Good," she said. "They should be." He looked at her. The morning light was full on her face now, and she looked tired in a way she hadn't been hiding well since before the data center, and the torn shoulder of the blazer had been replaced, but there was still a faint mark on the palm of the hand that had caught the roof deck, slightly reddened. She didn't look like someone who ran things from a height. She looked like someone who had just climbed down into something and gotten their hands marked by it. "What about Claire?" he asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "After we talk to the residents," she said. "I'll go to her tonight." "Be gentle with it," Damon said. "If it was her, she's been carrying that for a while." "I know." She paused. "I'm not good at gentle, usually." "I know," he said. "Try anyway." She looked at him sidelong, and something crossed her face that was wry and tired and genuine all at once. "Does everyone in your life receive that kind of blunt handling?" "Pretty much," he said. "Ask Keisha." For the first time in days, something close to a real laugh. Short, involuntary. And then she pressed her lips together and looked back at the harbor. "Let's go," she said. They left the 22nd floor and drove to Harborview. The meeting with the residents happened in the parking lot. No chairs, no podium. Damon had suggested the community room inside, but Mrs. Okafor, who had some instinct for these things, said the parking lot was better, more honest. Nobody sitting in rows like an audience. So they stood, about 80 people, the ones who were home at midday, bundled against the late November cold. And Victoria stood in the middle of them without the 3 black vehicles and without the executive retinue, and she told them the truth, all of it. The engineering fraud, the shell companies, Sutton, the falsified reports, the deliberately deferred maintenance, her own signature on documents she hadn't understood, the board decision that morning, the investigation that was coming. She did not soften it. She did not frame it as a past tense problem that had been resolved. She said, "This is what was done to you. This is who did it. This is what I did and didn't do. And this is what is going to happen next." In that order. Mr. Valentino, in his coat and his wool cap, stood at the back and listened to all of it without expression. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then a woman near the front, a young mother named Brianna, who had 2 kids under 5, and who Damon knew had been working double shifts at the hospital since her husband had been laid off, said, "So we stay? We're not getting kicked out? The redevelopment project is suspended, Victoria said. The independent investigation will take time. I'm not going to stand here and promise you nothing will ever change, because I don't know exactly what the investigation will find. What I can promise you is that no one is going to lose their home through a process I'm not willing to fully account for in public. Brianna looked at her for a long time. That's a pretty careful answer. Yes, Victoria said. It is, because I'm done giving you answers that sound better than they are. Another silence. Then Mrs. Okafor from near the side of the group said, "What about the south stairwell?" Damon looked at her. She was watching Victoria with the specific expression of a woman who'd spent enough of her life dealing with institutions to know the difference between what they said and what they did, and who was testing which one she was looking at right now. It's being repaired, Damon said. I filed the emergency work order this morning. I've already got 2 contractors confirmed for Monday. Mrs. Okafor looked at him, then at Victoria, then back at Damon. Okay, she said. Just that. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust restored. It was a small, provisional thing, the kind of thing that was only meaningful because of how much it cost the person giving it. Damon stood in the parking lot after the group dispersed, watching people move back toward the building. The cold had gotten serious in the last hour. A couple of kids ran past him toward the east wing, not caring about the cold the way children didn't, and the sound of them was loud and ordinary and everything. He became aware that Victoria was standing near him. The south stairwell, she said quietly. You filed the work order this morning. Before the board meeting. She was quiet for a moment. Before you knew how the board meeting would go. The stairwell needed fixing regardless of how the board meeting went, he said. She looked at him. Something in her face that he didn't have an easy name for. Not admiration exactly, something more complicated. The recognition, maybe, of a kind of consistency that she'd been trying to locate in herself and had been finding harder than she'd expected. Monday, she said. I'll have the funding authorized tonight. Already have a contractor who'll defer payment 30 days, he said. But the authorization would be appreciated. She nodded, looked at the building for a moment. The east wing, the south face, the windows with lights in some of them. Real light, living light, people making dinner and watching television and doing homework in the homes that had almost been taken from them by people who decided they were worth more as square footage than as shelter. Then she said quietly, "Thank you." He considered several responses and settled on the honest one. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We're still in the middle of it." "I know." She pulled her coat tighter, "But thank you anyway." He looked at the building, thought about the maintenance log in his back pocket, now containing more entries than any one person should have to write about a building that should have been maintained. Thought about the 9 days until the city inspection and the work that needed to happen before it, and the people inside whose lives had been made smaller by a conspiracy they'd had no part in and no knowledge of. He thought about Keisha, who would be home from school in 2 hours, and who he had promised to quiz on calculus, and who he was, despite everything, going to be there for, because that was the other thing that didn't wait for convenient timing. He looked at the sky, which was the specific flat gray of late November over water, and he breathed the cold air in, and then he turned and walked back to the building he maintained, with everything still ahead of him. Claire Donovan came to Victoria's hotel room at 9:30 that evening, carrying a paper cup of coffee she hadn't drunk and wearing the expression of someone who had been waiting for a particular door to open for a long time and wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified now that it had. Victoria had called her simply. No preamble, no indication of what the conversation would be. Just, "Can you come tonight, the hotel on Merchant, room 414. And Claire had said yes immediately, which was itself a kind of answer. She sat in the chair by the window. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed. Neither of them touched the room service menu or the additional coffee Victoria had ordered. "I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself," Victoria said. "I just want to know if it was you." Claire looked at her hands, the paper cup, the window behind which the harbor was dark and the lights of the opposite shore made small reflections on the water. "Yes," she said. Victoria nodded once. She'd known. But knowing and hearing were different weights. "I was placed in your office by Gerald," Claire said. Her voice was steady in the way that came from having rehearsed a truth for a long time. 3 years ago, he wanted someone who would tell him things, saw your schedule, your travel, what documents came to your desk, whether you were asking questions about anything. I did that for about 8 months. She stopped. Then I started actually working for you. What changed? Claire looked up. The boiler. Victoria was quiet. I found out about it after the fact. What had been authorized, what had been deferred, why? I went back through my own records, and I found the authorization package that I had routed to your desk, and I understood. I understood what I'd been part of. She swallowed. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I made choices. But after the boiler, I started documenting everything I could access. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew someone needed to keep a record because the people who were supposed to were destroying theirs. The archive at the data center, Victoria said. I moved the physical files there over 6 months, a few boxes at a time. I had access because Gerald had me managing several vendor relationships, including the facilities holding company. A pause. And I compiled the digital archive on the server. That took longer. I'm not a technical person. It took me a long time to figure out how to do it in a way that wouldn't be noticed. The file you sent me, Victoria said, in Seattle. I'd been watching for a moment when you were away from your normal environment, when the people watching you would be less certain of your movements. Claire looked at the coffee in her hands. I knew Gerald's people were watching your company devices. I knew the only way to reach you was through something they couldn't monitor. I set up the temporary address the day before you flew out. I thought if you saw it, you'd know what to do. You're better at knowing what to do than I am. I didn't handle it particularly well at first, Victoria said. You were cornered in an alley, Claire said quietly. That's not the same as not handling it well. Silence. Gerald knows it was me, Claire said. Or he suspects. That's why I looked the way I looked when I came to your office yesterday. I've been waiting for… I don't know what. I don't know what he'll do. Nothing, Victoria said. He's suspended pending investigation, and he knows that if he moves against you now, it becomes witness tampering on top of everything else. She paused. You're going to need to give a formal statement to the investigation team and likely to law enforcement. It will be uncomfortable, and it will be on the record. I know. And you falsified information to Sutton for 8 months, Victoria said. Not accusation, just the record. That's going to be part of the accounting. I know that too. Victoria looked at her. The woman who had sat outside her office for 3 years, who had routed her mail and managed her calendar and prepared her coffee, and somewhere inside all of that had carried the weight of what she'd helped build and what she'd tried to quietly unmake. You should get a lawyer, Victoria said. A good one. I'll give you a name. Claire nodded. Then, with a specific difficulty of someone asking for something they don't feel entitled to, am I going to be okay? Victoria considered the question honestly, because Claire deserved honesty and not comfort. I don't know, she said. But you did the right thing, even if it took a while to get there. A pause. That counts for something with the people who are going to be making decisions. I'll make sure they know. Claire left an hour later. Victoria sat in the hotel room and looked at the harbor for a long time without doing anything in particular. Then she called Damon. He answered on the second ring. She could hear the television in the background, low, the specific sound of a news program being half-watched. It was Claire, she said. I figured, he said. How is she? The question surprised her. Not because it was wrong to ask, but because it was the first question. Not what did she say, not what does this mean for the case, but how is she? Scared, Victoria said. Relieved, both. Yeah. A pause. That makes sense. She's going to cooperate fully with the investigation. She'll need some legal protection, but the information she has from being inside Sutton's operation for 8 months, that's significant. Serena will want to talk to her. Serena will be gentle about it, he said, and the slight irony in his voice indicated that he meant this genuinely and also understood that Serena's version of gentle was its own specific thing. Victoria almost smiled. How's the stairwell? Contractors confirmed for 7 Monday morning. I'll be there. A pause. Paula submitted her full assessment to the city today. sent copies to the investigation team and to the city inspector's office with a formal request that the emergency inspection be conducted with an independent engineer present. Will they agree to that? Serena thinks so. The city inspector's office doesn't want to be on the wrong side of this when it comes out, and it's going to come out. Paula's assessment is thorough enough that any inspector who tries to condemn this building against her findings is going to have a very difficult time explaining themselves publicly. A pause. It's not guaranteed, but it's significantly better odds than we had a week ago. Victoria looked at the harbor. Damon. Yeah. I'm going to restructure the residential portfolio management, she said. Not as a PR move. I want independent oversight on every property, third-party safety audits on a non-negotiable schedule, a resident advisory council for every building over 50 units, with actual standing, not just the right to submit complaints, but the right to be heard before major decisions. She paused. I've been thinking about how this happened, not just what Sutton did, how the structure allowed it. He had too much authority in a space with too little accountability. I had too much distance from the actual conditions of the properties I own. She stopped. That's a failure of design, not just of people. The design needs to change. Damon was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of work. I know. Are you going to do it, or are you going to announce it and then get busy with other things? She paused. That's a fair question. I'm asking it directly because I want a direct answer. I'm going to do it, she said. It will take time and it will be imperfect, and there will be things that don't work the way I intend them to. But I'm going to do it. A beat. You can hold me to that. I will, he said. No ceremony about it. Just, I will. She believed him. The 9 days before the city inspection were the hardest sustained stretch of any of it, because they required a different kind of endurance than the confrontations had. Not a single moment of decision, but a long corridor of tasks. Contractor coordination, legal filings, statement preparation, the investigation team's intake process, Paula's independent assessment being formally entered into the inspection record. Damon worked 14-hour days and didn't complain about it because complaining required energy he didn't have, and also because the work itself was the point. The south stairwell was completed by Wednesday. When the contractors finished and Damon walked it for the final check, testing each landing, each railing, each load-bearing point, he did it the way he did every final check. Thoroughly, without hurry, with the understanding that the difference between adequate and right was often a detail that only mattered when something went wrong. Everything held. Everything was right. He put it in the maintenance log with the date and his initials and closed the book. Mrs. Okafor used the stairwell that evening on her way home from her shift. He was in the lobby when she came through, and she paused at the base of the stairs and looked up them and then looked at him. Solid, she said. Yeah, he said. She nodded and went home. The city inspection happened on a Thursday, 11 days after the board meeting. Paula Reyes was present with her independent assessment. The city inspector, a man named Broward, who had the manner of someone who understood exactly what kind of attention this inspection was receiving, was thorough and unhurried and made no findings that contradicted Paula's assessment in any material way. The emergency condemnation filing was withdrawn. Harborview remained occupied. When Damon got the call from Victoria telling him the inspection was clear, he was on the roof of the East Wing replacing a flashing seal that had been on his list since September. He was 40 feet up, and the harbor wind was coming in cold and steady, and he sat down on the roof edge for a moment with the phone in his hand after the call ended and looked out at the water. He sat there for a while. Just that. The investigation ran for 4 months. Serena worked with the independent firm as a consulting investigator. Claire Donovan's cooperation proved as significant as Victoria had predicted. 8 months of first-hand knowledge of the operation's internal communications, names, decisions, the specific mechanisms by which authorization packages had been manipulated before reaching Victoria's desk. Raymond Chu, Sutton's college roommate, and the face behind the shell companies, was located in February in a service apartment in a city 3 states away and declined to comment to anyone about anything, which his lawyer communicated in a letter that Serena described as the most expensive silence she'd ever seen purchased. Gerald Sutton's lawyers were good. They were also working against a 4.5-year evidence archive compiled by someone who had been in the room for most of it, a financial trail through 4 shell companies that Serena had reconstructed with documentary precision. The testimony of a licensed structural engineer whose professional reputation was such that nobody wanted to be the person who publicly disputed her, and 3 years of handwritten maintenance records from a former Navy SEAL who had kept them because he understood that the difference between what was documented and what was done was where accountability lived. In March, Sutton accepted a plea arrangement. The terms were not lenient. Raymond Chu, 2 months later, accepted a separate arrangement that was marginally less harsh in exchange for cooperation. 3 executives were removed from their positions. 2 engineers from Coastal Engineering Associates faced professional licensing review. Victoria was not charged. The investigation established clearly, through the routing records Marcus had preserved in the Right Once compliance system, through Claire's testimony, through the pattern of manipulation across multiple authorization packages, that her signatures had been obtained through deliberate misrepresentation of the document's content and purpose. The finding did not erase her own public accounting of her failures and oversight, which she had given at the board meeting and repeated in a public statement she released the day the investigation concluded. She didn't walk back a word of it. Some people respected that. Some didn't. She had apparently made her peace with both outcomes. The Harbor View renovation began in April. Not a cosmetic renovation, a real one. Structural, mechanical, systems throughout. Damon supervised every phase of it. He hired 2 of the residents who had construction backgrounds to work on the crew, which was his own decision and not something he'd cleared with anyone. And when Victoria found out about it, she told him it was a good idea, which he already knew, but it was fine that she confirmed it. The building was unoccupied during the renovation. Every resident was placed in temporary housing, paid for entirely by Ashford Property Group, in buildings close enough to their children's schools and their jobs that daily life was disrupted as little as possible. This was not simple to arrange. Damon spent 3 weeks working on the logistics of it alongside a housing coordinator Victoria brought in, and there were families who were difficult to place and situations that required individual solutions, and more than one evening where he was on the phone until midnight working through a problem that resisted straightforward resolution. Mrs. Tremaine was placed in a building 4 blocks from Harbor View ground floor with a spare bedroom for when her granddaughter visited. Damon checked on her twice a week during the renovation. She made him tea the first time and then accepted that he was going to keep coming and started leaving the door unlocked when she expected him, which he understood was its own kind of trust and treated accordingly. Mr. Valentino didn't want to leave. He sat in his apartment the morning of the move with his coat on and his newspaper under his arm and told the housing coordinator that he had lived in that apartment for 11 years and he was not confident that he would successfully transplant at his age, and his tone made clear that he was prepared to have this argument for as long as necessary. Damon sat down across from him and told him the truth, that the renovation would take 5 months, that his apartment specifically would be improved in ways that would make it easier and safer. Wider bathroom doorways, better ventilation, a heating system that wasn't going to fail in February, that the building he was being moved to temporarily had a parking lot with good lighting and neighbors who were mostly quiet. "And you'll still be here?" Mr. Valentino said. "When it's done, you'll still be here." "Yeah," Damon said, "I'll be here." Mr. Valentino stood up. "Fine," he said. Not graciously, but he stood up. Keisha came to the building site on a Saturday in June, 5 weeks into the renovation. She stood in the gutted shell of the East Wing corridor and looked at the exposed bones of the building, the studs and pipes and conduit that were usually hidden behind walls, with the focused attention she brought to things that genuinely interested her. "It looks different like this," she said. "Everything does," Damon said, "when you see the inside of it." She looked at him. "Is that supposed to be a life lesson?" "Maybe," he said. "Did it land?" She made a face, but she was quiet for a moment after, which meant it had. He showed her around the site, the new south stairwell framing, solid and properly braced, the boiler room, which was getting a complete replacement system, the East Wing fire suppression lines, new throughout. She asked better questions than some of the contractors had asked, which did not entirely surprise him. Walking back through the lobby, she said without particular lead-up, "I want to study engineering." He looked at her. "Structural," she said. "Civil, maybe. Buildings." She gestured vaguely at the renovation around them. Stuff like this, the part where you figure out what's wrong and what it'll take to make it right. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what to say and decided the truest thing was also the simplest. "You'd be good at that," he said. She looked at the construction around her. "You think so?" "Yeah," he said. "I think so." She nodded, the way she received compliments from him. Briefly, without excessive reaction, filing it somewhere that mattered. Then she went to wait by the truck, and he stood in the gutted lobby of Harborview and felt something that didn't have a clean name. Not pride exactly, something older, something that had to do with watching a person become more themselves, and understanding that your job, mostly, was just to make sure you didn't get in the way of it. Harborview reopened in September. The residents came back on a Tuesday morning, staggered throughout the day, families with their boxes and their furniture and their particular accumulations of ordinary life. Damon was there from 6 in the morning. He held doors and carried things and answered questions about what had been changed and where things were now and whether the elevator was reliable and whether the heat was actually fixed or just claimed to be fixed. He told them the truth each time. What was new, what had been repaired versus replaced, what was still monitored. He didn't oversell it. The building was not perfect, buildings weren't, but it was right, in the way he'd made the south stairwell right, thoroughly, without shortcuts, with the understanding that the people who lived in it deserved the real version and not the version that looked adequate from the outside. The Nguyens came back mid-morning, all 7 of them, Daniel carrying a box that was visibly too heavy for him and refusing to admit it. Damon took it from him without comment. Daniel pretended to be relieved rather than grateful, which was fine. Brianna came back with her 2 kids and a man Damon hadn't seen before. Her husband, apparently, who had found work again during the relocation period, something in logistics, and who shook Damon's hand with the particular grip of someone who understood they were thanking him for something that couldn't be adequately thanked. Mrs. Okafor came at 3 in the afternoon, after her shift, and walked through her apartment door and stood in the middle of her living room for a moment without saying anything. Her daughter Amara was with her. Amara looked around the apartment, the new flooring, the repainted walls, the properly functioning radiator, and then at Damon in the doorway. "The same apartment," Amara said. "Same apartment," Damon confirmed. Amara looked at her mother. Something passed between them that he wasn't meant to fully understand, and he didn't try to. Victoria came in the late afternoon. She came alone, without Marcus, without any of the black vehicles. She parked on Alcott Street and walked in through the side entrance, and she found Damon in the lobby sitting on a folding chair with his maintenance log open, making notes, the way he'd been doing on and off all day between helping residents move in. She stood in the lobby of the building she owned and looked at the new tile, the functioning overhead lights, all of them. The elevator with its freshly serviced doors that opened and closed without hesitation. The directory board with its list of residents, the same names they'd always been. "It's good," she said. "It is," he agreed. She looked at him. "I offered you the director of residential operations position. You said no." "I know." "The salary was significant." "I know that too." He closed the maintenance log. "I'm a maintenance man. I'm good at it. I like the work." He looked at her steadily. "If I'm director of something, I stop being the person who walks the building and notices the things that need noticing. That's the person who actually matters here, not the one with the title." Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people spend a lot of energy wanting to be something other than what they're already good at, he said. She considered this. Then, the resident advisory councils are established. All 14 properties. They have charter standing, the right to review any major operational decision and formally object on record before it proceeds. She paused. Paula Reyes' firm is contracted for independent annual structural assessments on every residential property we own. 3-year contract, renewable, with the resident councils having co-approval authority on the contract terms. "That's not nothing," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." "How's Claire?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. Working through it, her lawyer negotiated a cooperation agreement, no criminal charges in exchange for full testimony. She's looking for a new position. Outside property management. A pause. She sent me a message last week just to say she hoped the building came out well. Did you write back? I said it did. She paused. I also said that what she built in that data center was the thing that made everything else possible. Because it was true, and because she needed to hear it. A beat. You would have told me to do that. Probably, he agreed. She walked to the lobby window and looked at the parking lot. The October light was different from the November dark where this had all started. Warmer, lower, the specific angle of autumn that made ordinary things look briefly significant. A few kids from the building were out there now, 2 of them on bikes, one sitting on the hood of a car reading something that was probably a phone. Serena's been asked to consult on a municipal housing investigation in another city, Victoria said. Similar pattern to what happened here. Falsified maintenance records, shell company structures. She called me to ask if I'd provide a reference. What did you say? That I'd provide the most honest reference she'd ever received, which she said was exactly what she wanted. A slight smile at that. She's a strange person. She's a good investigator, Damon said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He stood up. His knee was bothering him. It had been bothering him more since the cold set in, which was new and which he was not ready to think about yet. He picked up the maintenance log and put it in his back pocket. Walk with me, he said. They walked the building, all 5 floors. He showed her what had been done, and she listened the way she'd learned to listen over the past 4 months. Not with the distant authority of an owner reviewing a property, but with the specific attention of someone trying to understand what something actually was. He showed her where the boiler room had been rebuilt from the concrete up. He showed her the east wing fire suppression lines, new copper throughout. He showed her the south stairwell. She walked it herself, up and down, tested the railing. He watched her and didn't say anything. When she came back to the ground floor, she said, "The woman on the 4th floor, Mrs. Tremaine." "She's back," he said. "Came home Monday. I helped her bring her plants in." Victoria nodded. "How is she?" "She's 73 and she has emphysema and she's home," he said. Which is what she wanted. They came out through the side exit on Alcott Street and stood in the alley. The same alley. Not the one behind the Harbor Grand. This was the side alley of Harbor View itself, where the service entrance was, where Damon came and went every day. But standing in it, the memory of the other alley was present. It didn't need to be named. The evening was coming in. The harbor was visible at the end of the street, past the warehouse on the corner, the water dark and moving. "That night," Victoria said, "if you hadn't been coming home that way." "I was always coming home that way," he said. 8 minutes faster. She looked at the water. "I keep thinking about that. The way things hinge on the smallest choices. A route home, a phone bought with cash, a fire alarm pull station on a wall." She paused. "It makes me nervous how random it was." "It wasn't random," he said. "You were the one who kept the phone instead of letting them take it. You were the one who came back to find me instead of handing it to a lawyer and letting someone else deal with it. You were the one in that data center." He looked at her. "The alley was luck. Everything after that was you." She was quiet for a moment. "And you," she said. "And me," he allowed. She looked at the building, the lights in the windows. Real light, living light. The particular warm yellow of apartments where people were home, making dinner, doing homework, watching something on television, living the ordinary texture of their lives in the place they belonged. "I used to own a building," she said quietly. "Now I think I'm starting to understand what that actually means." He stood beside her and looked at it. The Harbor View apartments in the last of the evening light, imperfect and solid and full. He thought about what to say. He thought about what it meant to maintain something, not just a building, but anything worth keeping. That it wasn't a single act. That it was the choice you made every morning to show up and look at what was actually there rather than what you wished was there, and to do the work that the real condition required, not the work that was easiest. He thought about Keisha, who wanted to build things, who would be better at it than he could fully imagine yet. He thought about the maintenance log in his back pocket, which had a new page starting today. "It means showing up," he said. "Every day. Even when it's a pipe that needs fixing at 6 in the morning in February, even when it's something harder than a pipe. He paused. Especially then. Victoria nodded slowly. Somewhere above them, a window opened. Second floor, the sound of music briefly louder, someone calling a name, the small domestic sounds of a building full of people going about their evening. Then the window closed and the sounds became muffled again, contained, present without being intrusive. The water at the end of the street caught the last of the light and held it for a moment. Damon put his hands in his pockets. "I've got rounds to do," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her once more. There was nothing unresolved between them that needed to be said tonight, which was its own kind of completion. Not the absence of complexity, but the presence of enough clarity that the complexity didn't have to be performed. They were two people who had walked through something difficult together and had each come out changed by it in ways they were still discovering. "Good night, Victoria," he said. "Good night, Damon," she said. He went back into the building through the side entrance. He heard her footsteps on the sidewalk heading toward Alcott Street, and then the quiet settling in behind them. He did his rounds, every floor, every exit, the new stairwells, the refurbished elevator, the boiler room, the fire suppression checkpoints on each level. The same route he'd walked for 3 years, in a building that was the same address and a different thing than it had been. On the 5th floor, at the end of the east corridor, he stopped at the window that looked out toward the harbor. The water was fully dark now, the lights of the opposite shore making their small, indifferent reflections. The city around Harbor View was doing what cities did at this hour, settling into its evening, the particular frequency of a place that didn't stop but changed its rhythm. He stood there for a minute, not doing anything, just looking at what was there. There was a dent in the windowsill that he'd noted in his log 18 months ago and had never managed to get authorized for repair, back when authorizations for things like dents in windowsills weren't getting through. He looked at it now. Small, unimportant, a cosmetic thing. He pulled out the log and wrote it down with today's date. Tomorrow he'd pick up the right filler compound from the supply room and fix it himself. It would take 10 minutes. Small things. Right things. The long, unglamorous work of keeping what mattered from falling apart. He put the log away and finished his rounds and went home to his daughter, who was at the kitchen table with her calculus book open and a look of determined frustration on her face that he recognized from every hard thing she'd ever tackled, which she had always, in the end, figured out. "How bad is it?" he said, hanging up his jacket. "It's not bad," she said, which meant it was moderately bad. "I just need to go through it again." "Okay," he said. "Give me 5 minutes." He washed his hands, made 2 cups of tea, sat down across from her and looked at the problem she was working on. They went through it together. It took 40 minutes, not 5, because the problem was actually harder than she'd initially shown him, which was typical. She got there. She always did. After she closed the book and picked up her tea and said, without particular segue, "The building looks good." "It does," he said. "Are the people happy to be back?" He thought about Mrs. Okafor standing in her living room, the Nguyens filing through their front door, Mr. Valentino, who had not said thank you, but had been home and sitting in his chair with his newspaper by 10 in the morning, and that was its own answer. "Yeah," he said, "they're home." Keisha looked at her tea. 16 years old, already becoming the person she was going to be, which was someone he wouldn't entirely recognize and was entirely proud of. "Good," she said. Outside, the harbor district was quiet in the way it got after 10. Not empty, just settled. The building around them held its people in their rooms. The new pipes, the solid stairwells, the functioning systems behind the walls that most people would never think about because they were never supposed to need to think about them. That was the point. That was what maintenance meant when it was done right. Damon Mercer sat at his kitchen table with his daughter in the apartment where they had lived for 3 years, in the building where they belonged, and the night came in around them the way nights did, ordinary and sufficient, asking nothing more than what they already had.